What was the actual pain point that started this? What was the original problem? Because that's the thing worth solving. The person you think is on your side isn't usually the one that you should be watching. We spend a lot of our time in a conflict focused on the obvious antagonist, the one that everybody is pointing at. But we rarely stop to look at whose finger is even doing that pointing. And I want to show you how to read what's actually happening when a conflict blows up, online, at work, your community, anywhere. And I'm not bringing you a new theory here. I'm bringing you the receipts. Behavioral scientists, sociologists, and organizational psychologists have been studying the architecture of conflict for decades. They know exactly how this works. Because most of the time, the fight you're watching isn't the fight that's even being fought. And sometimes the person holding the match, the one who started the fire, is the same one who handed you the water that you believed would put out the fire. And once you've seen this pattern, you'll recognize it everywhere. On the shop floor, in the boardroom, in your industry groups online. But it started before any of that. In the 1980s, a conflict researcher named Glasl mapped exactly how disagreements mutate into total warfare. He built a 9-stage escalation model that organizational psychologists still use to this day. The details are worth a separate video, but the thing that matters for us in this video is what he found about where conflicts go wrong. In the beginning of a conflict, Glasl's early stages, it's usually healthy. Someone shares a real frustration and others confirm it. A consensus forms, and that is how teams actually surface real problems. But there's a specific transition point where everything changes. Glasl called it the shift from problem solving to opponent defeating. The goal stops being fix this and starts being win this. And once that shift happens, the original nuance is gone. People pick their teams, extreme voices get the most attention. And by the later stages, the conversation has almost nothing to do with the original problems and everything to do with momentum. The early stages are usually real. The transition point where it shifts from problem solving to opponent defeating, that is where you need to slow down and pay attention. Because whoever accelerates that shift, whoever moves the group from solve it to win it, they're doing something deliberate. And it's almost never the person that everyone's eyes are on. So here's why this is so hard to catch in real time. Your brain evaluates moments individually. It says something kind, you register kind. When they offer help, you register helpful. When they take your side, you register ally. Each moment getting filed away separately. And that's how we process the world, one frame at a time. The problem is that the most effective influence in organizations, communities, or online is built specifically for that limitation. The most effective influence is built specifically for that limitation. Every single move looks completely reasonable in isolation. The kind word was reasonable. The show of support, understandable. The escalation, well, things did get bad, right? The people who joined in, they were just responding to what happened. They were just responding to the frames that they saw happen. And it's only when you stack these moves sequentially, when you read the whole instead of the individual frames, that the pattern even becomes visible. And that's the skill, not evaluating moments, but reading sequences. Because a kind word is just that, a kind word. But a kind word followed by a show of support, followed by escalation, followed by your name attached to something that you never even signed up for, that's architecture. And the reason it works is that at no single point did anything happen that you couldn't explain away on its own. So here's what to look for when you're trying to read a situation clearly. Start with the original problem. Strip away everything that accumulated on top of it and ask, what was the actual pain point that started this? What was the original problem? Because that's the thing worth solving. And it's almost always simpler and so much more specific than what the conflict becomes about. Then we need to watch the frame. Sociologist Erving Goffman spent his career studying how the presentation of information shapes the way that we respond to it. His framing theory comes down to this: whoever controls the meaning controls the outcome. The facts don't drive behavior. The frame around the facts does. So watch for that specific moment, the personal experience that becomes a sweeping systemic conclusion. That leap doesn't happen on its own. Someone builds the bridge, and you can evaluate their intent by watching the direction the frame moves. A frame that's genuinely trying to solve something gets narrower over time towards specific changes, specific accountability, ownership, and resolution. A frame that is taken on its own energy gets wider. More people pulled in, higher stakes, more pressure, and if the scope keeps expanding, the goal probably isn't resolution anymore. And then we need to watch what happens when resolution is actually offered. This is the single clearest diagnostic in any conflict, and most people miss it entirely. At some point, in most situations, a real path to resolution gets offered. A private conversation, a seat at the table, direct access to whoever has the power to fix it. And if the goal was resolution, the offer gets taken. If the offer gets refused or used as fuel rather than as an off-ramp, that tells you everything you needed to know. When someone consistently moves away from every off-ramp, they need the conflict more than they need the outcome. Finally, when the dust settles, map who ended up better off. The people at the center of this, the ones whose genuine experience started it all, are they stronger at the end? Do they have more clarity, more agency? Are they closer to what they needed? Or are they more exposed and further from resolution than when this even started? Because if the people the conflict was supposedly about are worse off, and someone on the periphery walked away with more influence, more power, more stature, the process didn't serve them. Someone else got served. And now, here's where it gets specific. Because once you understand that your brain reads moments instead of sequences, you start to notice that escalating conflicts tend to follow the same observable pattern of behaviors. Not because people are reading from the same script, but because this is just what effective influence looks like in practice. And the thing that makes all of this hard to catch is what I said earlier. Each of these behaviors on its own can often look completely reasonable. It's only the sequence as a whole that reveals what's actually happening. The first thing you'll almost always see is someone showing up early with genuine warmth. They listen well, they validate the person who's hurting, they become the trusted voice in the room. And that trust is often real. It's earned. But watch what happens to it over time. Does the empathy stay consistent regardless of where people stand, or does it quietly become available only to the people who are moving in a useful direction? Empathy that's selective isn't empathy, it's positioning. And the second thing to watch for is how the other side gets talked about. In a conflict that's genuinely trying to reach resolution, people engage with each other's arguments, even the uncomfortable ones. What you see instead, in a conflict that's been strategically shaped, is that the other side stops having arguments. They have pathologies. They get labeled, diagnosed. And once someone has been diagnosed, nothing they say has to be taken seriously anymore. Every word becomes a symptom. Every word. So pay attention to whether the people doing the diagnosing are trying to understand the situation, or if they're trying to make sure that certain voices can't be heard. Third, watch how the options get framed. Complex situations have a lot of possible paths through them, and when someone is genuinely trying to solve a problem, they tend to stay curious about those paths. When someone needs the conflict to move in a specific direction, the options collapse. Suddenly it's binary. You're either with us or against us. You're either part of the solution or part of the problem. And that kind of simplification doesn't happen by accident. It happens because nuance is where people start thinking for themselves, and independent thinking is hard to direct. Fourth, and this is the hardest one to see, the most effective influence in any of this never looks like influence. Nobody gets told what to do. Instead, the environment gets shaped. The frame gets built, the options get narrowed, the emotional context gets set. And then, people make their own decisions. They escalate because it feels like the right thing to do. They apply pressure because the situation seems to call for it. They feel completely free because they are free. They just happen to be thinking inside a room that someone else designed. And the question worth asking isn't whether anyone told you what to do or not. It's whether someone built the room that you're thinking in. Fifth, look at who's absorbing the risk. In most escalating conflicts, there's someone calm at the center, reasonable, measured. They're not the ones saying the inflammatory things. The other people are doing that on their own. But trace the logic and the framing back, and you'll often find it originated there. And the tell is simple. Compare what someone says to what happens after they say it. If every reasonable sounding contribution is followed by escalation, the reasonableness is the performance, and the escalation is the product. And then there's one last one, and this is the one that took me the longest to understand, is the most successful version of all of this doesn't end with resentment. It ends with loyalty. The people who got caught up in it, who got used, who are pointed in the direction that serves someone else's interest, they don't feel used. They feel seen, supported, like someone finally stood beside them when it mattered, and they're grateful for it. They're genuinely, deeply grateful. And that's the tell. It's not anger, it's not regret, it's simple gratitude. So if you look back at a conflict and find that the people who were most useful to someone else's agenda are now that person's loudest defenders. Stop and ask whether what happened actually served them. Ask who ended up with more, ask who ended up with less, because the most sophisticated version of this doesn't feel like manipulation from the inside. It feels like it's finally being understood. Okay, I want to stop here a second, because there's one more layer, and it's the one that changes how this whole framework feels once you see it. Everything I've described to this point, the empathy, the diagnosis, the compressed options, the clean hands, and all that, we tend to picture these moves being used against a cause, against the people who are raising legitimate concerns, against the people with real grievance. But here's what's actually true, and it's the hardest part to sit with. The most effective use of this playbook happens inside the cause. So here's what organizational psychologists have found across decades of studying group conflict. They've found that the most destabilizing figure in any movement isn't the obvious opponent. It's the advocate who needs the problem to stay unsolved, because a solved problem means no platform, no moral authority, and no influence. The person most likely to be running this playbook isn't the one the conflict is pointed at. It's the one who sounds the most like an ally, the one who validated earliest, the one who built the most trust before any of this started, the one who by the time you think to question them has already been established as one of the good ones. So, watch whether the person leading the charge is replicating the exact dynamic they claim to oppose, just a little bit more skillfully, just with better positioning, or with their name on the right side of the ledger. Because that pattern is everywhere, and it almost never gets named. The conflict you're watching might be completely legitimate. The problem might be real, and the people raising it might be doing so in good faith. And then the person narrating it for you might still be using it. They might still be reframing it for their own purpose. All of those things can be true at the same time. So, what do you actually do with all of this? Well, the first thing, and I know it sounds simple, is to just wait. The first 48 hours of any conflict are almost entirely controlled by whoever moves fastest to define what it means. That speed often gets mistaken for clarity, but it isn't. The picture will always change if you give it time. Most of the conclusions people lock into on day 1 look completely different by day 5. The second thing is to keep your attention on sequences, not moments. This is just the core skill applied to your own life. When you're inside a situation, your instinct is to evaluate what's happening right now. But a single kind gesture doesn't tell you anything, just like a single troubling moment doesn't tell you anything either. But what does tell you something is the patterns over time. The direction things keep moving. Who keeps benefiting from them? What keeps happening after certain people speak? So zoom out as far as you can and read the whole film. Then we need to watch what people do, not what they say, because language is easy to control. And actions are harder to fake consistently. When things are tense, you need to ask yourself who's making the call they didn't have to make. Who's having the uncomfortable conversations in private instead of performing in public? Who's actually trying to fix something versus who needs you watching while they try? Those two groups are almost never the same people. And pay closer attention to what happens when a real path to resolution appears, because it will appear. At some point in almost every escalating situation, someone offers an off-ramp, a direct conversation, a structural change, a genuine attempt to address what started this all. What happens next is the most honest signal you're going to get from the whole situation. If resolution was the goal, the offer will land. If it gets refused or picked apart or used as evidence in bad faith, that tells you more than anything else that came before it. So, one more thing, and I want to be really direct about this one. Being on the receiving end of a strategic campaign doesn't automatically make you innocent. The person who gets provoked still owns their reaction. The person whose pain gets used still owns what they chose to do with it. This framework isn't a tool for finding heroes and villains. It's not an excuse for a lack of accountability. Complexity runs in every direction, and what it's for is seeing clearly. And that means applying it honestly, including to the people who you're otherwise inclined to defend. And finally, be careful with what's yours. Your genuine experiences, your honest perspective, your credibility, those are worth something. So be thoughtful about who gets to point them at their goals. There's a real difference between someone helping you see a situation more clearly and someone borrowing your face for their campaign. The first path leads towards what you need. The second leans towards what they need. And the most sophisticated version of that, you won't be able to tell the difference while it's happening. You'll only see it when you look at who ended up better off. The next time something blows up, your timeline, your team, your industry, don't pick a side first. Read the sequence, read the events. Find the original problem. Watch who set the frame and which direction it moved. Notice what happened when resolution was offered and who ended up better off, especially among the people who were supposedly being helped. You won't always find a hidden agenda. Often it really is what it looks like. A real problem, a real conflict, and people doing their best in a hard situation. But sometimes the loudest fight in the room is cover for the quietest play. And sometimes the person holding the match, the one who started the fire, is the one who handed you the water. The people who navigate this well aren't smarter than you, they're just slower to pick a team. They're more patient, but they're faster to ask, what's actually going on here?
Thanks for watching. If you like this content, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Abelara Ascent. See more, improve more.